Welcome to another fantasy draft extravaganza. This is the final part in our 4-part series on techniques, tips, little hints and tricks on things that you should do if you're getting into a Yahoo Fantasy League. And again, we already have 4 episodes up. If you haven't watched those, you should probably go back and watch those first. And specifically, we looked at kind of the lower level teams, the pretenders, and how to adjust and compete, and kind of the middle teams, the teams that aren't quite the superpowers of your league, but they're not at the bottom, and techniques that you can use there as well. Episode 4 today, we are going to focus on contending teams. You've been brought into a league to replace a manager that is in the top 3 or 4 of the league at that time. What should you be doing? How can you keep that team competing not only for this year, but for years down the line? And at the end of this episode, we're going to look at viewer questions and answer some of the questions that you guys have emailed me that you want Frank to answer. So without further ado, let's bring back Frank to the episode. Welcome back, Frank. How's it in Montreal this evening?
Pretty good. We're up 1-0, so that's pretty. It's
Oh,
surprising, but yeah, we scored a goal in the first minute. So
and talk about dedication, viewers. Frank is kind of giving up his Montreal Canadian viewing right now, to put this episode with me together. So again, Frank has been kind enough. He is on our panelists for a regular program, and he's working with me here on kind of a fantasy league tutorial series. So this is episode 4. Again, go back, watch the first 3 before you watch this one. And Frank, again, is one of the top fantasy league players that I've come across. He does extremely well, especially in the keeper and the dynasty leagues, won a lot of trophies, and is, again, in that diamond tier that Yahoo Fantasy ranks its managers. So he's got some good advice. So tonight, Frank, we're going to look at the contenders, what you can do if you take over a league that's contending. So I'll leave it to you. I'll show the slides that you want me to show. Where do you want to start? You're taking over a top 4 contending team.
yeah, so like we did for pretenders and middle teams, you can bring up the Excel because that's the first thing you should do is get an idea of where you are with that team. And again, to make it easier, I put it in Excel and I put the ages of the roster. And that's just to figure out what your average age is. And you'll see if you watch all 3 episodes closer together, you'll see a lot of over 30s players on my team, which is the contending team. And that's normal because contenders want to win today. So we don't mind the older players because we are trying to win today. A pretender having guys over 30, it's better for them to take that asset and bring assets for the future because if they're going to be in a position to win in 3-4 years. For example, Brent Burns, who's 37, well, in 3-4 years, he's going to be 40, 41. So he won't be in a position to produce for you uh, when you'll be competing. So that's why you see that dramatic changes when you look at the ages. So if we go down the list in pink, I have 2 players, Jordan Stahl, um, 34. He was added for injury reserve. If you look down below, I had all 6 IR positions filled at this time. So he was just an injury replacement, so not somebody I was going to keep longer term. And I dropped him this weekend to make room for Ekblad and Ottinger, who came off the injured reserve. And then Andrew Peak, it's just I have 9 defensemen, so he was just not somebody I wanted to keep longer term because I drafted Jirasek, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So if you look, I have O'Reilly, Panarin, Ovechkin. the list is long. Zuccarello, Eric Carlson, Torrey Krug, Brent Burns, which I mentioned, Markstrom, Jonathan Quick, Klingberg, Sidney Crosby, Tavares, Letang, Tarasenko, who are Backstrom, and Robin Liner, who are 30 plus. So the list is extensive. So when you get a team like this, you know that you're getting a bunch of talent because you have basically your starting positions are Zibanejad at center with Crosby and Tavares, and your left wings are taken care of. Your right wings, even your D is taken care of. So you're the thing with this is you have to maintain it if you want to continue winning. I've seen many managers when they take over a team like this, they tear it down. Uh, they start trading the older folks for younger players. That means you're not going to contend. And my philosophy when I play fantasy hockey, because this is not a cash league, uh, I want to win at all costs. So my attitude is no. Uh, Try to take advantage of a league like that to uh, try to win every year. Um, but I see it all the time where gung ho younger owner comes in and just tears it down, and that means he's gonna rebuild for the next 5 6 years, and that's not my philosophy in life. So I just want to win every year. So Andrew Peak is pink on this thing, but he's since been traded again to make room, and Laurent Brossois has been dropped also. So he was activated from long-term IR by Vegas. He was wavered. Nobody picked him up. So he's in the AHL. So I had to drop him. So my IR went from 6 to 3 because Paul was activated, Ekblad was activated, and Ottinger was activated. So lots of talents through and through at every position. So the second thing
So
you need to
before you move on there, Frank, let me just ask you because as a new guy coming in, I look at this team and I go, I've got 17 players that are 30 years or older. And just like in the real NHL, new managers always like to try and put their mark on a team. Like you said, they want to make moves and put on a mark. And I come in and I say, "Hey, I've got 17 players that are over 30 years old. I can't compete for years with this team. I got to blow it up." What would you say to someone with that mentality that there's too many old guys? Yeah, I might do well this year, but I got to think long term, Frank. I got to think 10 years down the road. I got to blow it up now. What would you say to a manager like that?
I would say start offering your 30 plus, and you will quickly find out that there's no market in a dynasty for anybody over 30. So you're going to sell for pennies on the dollar. So you might as well just go for it. Um, I got a lot of 30 plus players in the last 12 years at a discount. I remember one was Jerome McGinley at 32. This is a long time ago, but the manager was shopping him around and was getting ridiculous offer. So I gave him a ridiculous offer, but better than the other ridiculous offer, and he allowed me to win the league because he was a multi-cat stud. So you have to be cognizant that in a dynasty, it's not a redraft league. Um, Age matters. So you have basically a third of the league that wants nothing to do with your 30 plus players. You have the middle teams that have you might have a market for them, but they're not going to overpay because they're trying to become a contender. And then you have your other contenders who will gladly take over uh, your 30 plus players, but they won't give you market value for them. And then you're just going to plummet in the standings and become a pretender. Usually, goaltenders 25, 26, 27, 28, that's when they become starters. So it takes them a long time. So to me, it's like, no, put all my chances on my side, and a lot of them will bust out. The key is get rid of them before they become long in the tooth. So
Right.
that's
And
my personal strategy, but this is not a right or wrong. If you're not going to do the research, you're probably better off loading up on forwards, which will have more impact because those are easier to track towards the NHL.
right. And when we looked at my team as kind of a middle team last episode, I as well have stacked up on goaltenders because it's a position of weakness right now. I have some backups that may progress to be really good starters, but I am gambling on one or two of these guys becoming that franchise goalie for the next 10, 15 years in this league. So again, a lot of dynasty leagues, a lot of managers do kind of focus on the goaltenders. And you talked about, the boom and the busts of players. But I think we're going to go through a couple examples now, Frank, of players that were perceived to be busts because they didn't perform early in their career, but were just kind of late bloomers. Maybe talk about those two players.
Yep. So if you go to our league site right now, so once you've done the exercise of looking at what you have age-wise, what you have on the farm, and my farm is full of like Lysel is all or nothing, Rosen, like everything is boom or bust. So when you click on the team, and we look at average stats throughout the my team, so I'll say the contender, uh, and this is where you'll see how the team is pretty good. Um, yeah, so you see Crosby, top 50. Let's just go through the top 50 fantasy hockey players I have on my team right now. So Crosby, Tavares, Zibanejad, Kachuk, Montour, who's a big surprise, Kucherov. Oh, and I Ottinger because he was hurt, 58. So I have six, I think I counted, in a 12 team league. So usually if we're 12, 50, there's 4 or 5 per team. So I'm above average. People who are disappointing, again, St. Louis. Um, Tarasenko's 298th, not worried about him. Chris Letang, Pittsburgh is having trouble, so 260th, but that's temporary. Klingberg, new team. Anaheim, that I'm a little bit worried, 477. Jersey, I'm not, he's developing. St. Louis again, Torrey Krug, 524 ranked. And O'Reilly, 605. So my St. Louis trio is doing awful, like the whole team. And then my goalies. It's goalies to start this year. They're goalies are all out of whack. So you have Jonathan Quick 329, and Markstrom 604, and Demko 787. You're basically better benching those two than playing them. So, but it's a topsy turvy start to the year. So going back, you see, I have very high end talent at center, defenseman, left wing, right wing. So when I look at players I need to add to my team that are probably going to be drops when injured reserve come back, but you can see my injured reserve. I have Robin Lehner, who's out for the year, so I don't have to make a decision until the end of the year. And Backstrom is out till the spring, probably, with his back. So I have two guys that are out very long term. So who did I pick up? I picked up Maxime Comtois and Owen Tippett. So why did I pick those two? I categorize those two as fallen angels. So lots of hype on them, especially Comtois was a multi-cat stud, etc. And Owen Tippett, I went to research him and I went, oh, he's interesting. So if you put through the Hockey DB, which is a wonderful resource when you want to look at different players, So we can start with Owen Tippett. So Owen Tippett is 6'1", so he's not a small guy. 207 pounds, so he's not going to be pushed around. He's first round X 10th pick overall in 2017. And if you look at the years he's played, he got his cup of tea, 7 games at 18, right after his draft. He played in the NHL, and then they brought him back down. And you look at his production, 75 points in 60 games in his draft year, 75 points in 51 games. Oh, this guy pretty much produced. And the year after, 74 points in, again, 54 games. So he's like 75, 75, 74. I went, okay, that's interesting. Then he played the AHL after his junior. 40 points in 46 games. I go, that's almost a point per game. Then he went back, played the NHL. Didn't click, 45 games. Again, back to the AHL in 2020 last year. 18 points in 12 games. I'm there. Okay, so this guy can produce at the pro level at the AHL. It just didn't click with the Florida Panthers, so they trade him to Philadelphia in the Claude Giroux trade. Then he plays in Philly, 21 games, 7 points. Again, nothing major, but new coach. He seems to like him. He's getting top 6 minutes. And I'm there, okay. So this is a gamble, pure and simple. Is he going to fulfill his fantasy and NHL prospects when he got drafted? Because he was a top 10 pick. And he's not one of those picks where he didn't have the speed. You look at all his scouting reports, he's very fast, heavy shot. He's got all the attributes to be successful. He just hasn't put it together at the NHL level. So, being a contender, I can't draft that much talent where I draft, even if I have draft picks. So I have to rely on fallen angels like this. I gamble. If they're successful, I'll find a way to keep them on my team. But this is what I have to do. And if my gamble pays off and he becomes 60-point guy and he hits, so you'll fill him, he shoots a lot. So then I'll say, all right, I got a free fantasy asset out of it. The second player is Maxime Comtois. So him looking at it, same draft, 2017, coincidentally. He's not a high draft pick, second round, but he's 6'2", 210. Again, a big guy, and he's a multi-cat stud. But him in his draft plus 1 year after that, you can see he had his cup of tea, 10 games in the NHL. So they burnt his entry-level contract. Then they send him to the AHL. Then they send him to the Q. So he produced in juniors. He played only parts of a season for San Diego Gulls, 24 points in 31 games. But the key here is in 2020, 2021, 55 games, 33 points, 16 goals, 17 assists. So you go, okay. So this guy has the potential of being 20-20, 30-30. Last year was a disaster. Anaheim was a disaster. So again, I go, he's playing on the first line with Zegras. And I'm there, okay, take a gamble. If it doesn't work out, I'll just drop him. Both of these guys are 23. Power forwards usually hit their primes between 24, 25, 26. So those are two gambles I have to take being a contender. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter. I'm a contender. And that's where I can take those gambles. Any contender can take those gambles. Pretenders, they can't afford to have somebody not work out. Middle teams, they like pretenders can't have any mistakes if they want to become a contender. Middle teams can have some, but not a lot.
Yeah, and there you go. And that's why Frank is, always near the top, because he's constantly researching, constantly looking on Dauber, constantly looking at lines, and who's playing power play, who's getting the minutes, looking at the average stats. and picking, as he said, these fallen angels that, are on the waiver wire. And, take a look. There are some really good players that can fill in at least short term. You got to do the research, though. So
Yep.
there you have the contender, you have the pretender, you have the middle. Any team you take over now in a dynasty league, of course, they all have different rules, different settings, different categories, but at least you now have the basic kind of formula for what you should be doing when you take over any level of team. And Frank, now that we kind of have looked at all three teams, I've gathered a few questions over the first two episodes. A few people have sent things in, and I'm not going to put, their names or email or anything like that. We'll kind of keep them private and confidential, but they did have, I think I got about 12 questions altogether. I picked kind of the top 10. So let's run through those and let's hear
Let's go.
Frank's advice for some
Let's
of these
go.
questions. All right. Question number one, Frank. Let me just put you on the screen with the question here. I am in a non-trade dynasty league, 4 years running, similar farm rules to what you have, but a couple less slots, with no trades and 60 moves a season. If you are close to making the league playoffs, how many should you keep for the last couple weeks and playoffs? So, kind of a moves question here.
Playoffs are 3 weeks, depending if it's 6 and 6. There's 4 teams that get a bye. So you play 2 weeks, and depending on when you start, the championship round, the last round is either a week and a half. 60 moves, you need to keep at least 10 for the playoffs because a lot of injuries, I'll say quote unquote, and those are not injuries, it's teams that want to rest their vets that pretend they have a boo-boo. So that would allow you to, instead of just having your stars benched at the end, those are the worst because then you can't replace without dropping. But I would keep at least 10 out of the 60. And also petition. What's the point of being in a no trade dynasty? That's the fun of being in a dynasty is trading for the future.
Yeah, and maybe the person is watching this video and kind of send me another email with the rationale, but I know there are some leagues out there that are kind of a draft to glory type of league where you live and die based on who you draft and who you cut and bring in. And I guess with only 60 moves, those moves are even more important because they are now your only way of acquiring players through a league is through the waiver wire. So
Yeah,
interesting.
I just find that way if you're a pretender, it takes forever to become a contender if you wait for your draftees to become relevant.
Yeah.
Jack
Yeah.
Hughes was a number 1 overall pick. Nico Hischier was a number 1 overall pick. Lafreniere was a number 1 overall pick. Lafreniere is still not fantasy relevant. It's 3, 4, 5 years. You can't take the youth from the contenders to boost. If you have vets, you can't trade them. You can just drop them. So I find that is just it, if you don't have a lot of time, it's perfect because you don't have to trade anything. You just draft and then see what gets dropped or what's available on the free agent. But it's going to take a long, long time to become a contender from a pretender. So that's not the type of league I would join personally. I need more
Yeah.
action. Um, it's like that would be a little bit too boring for me.
And that's the beauty of fantasy hockey is there's so many different types of setups and
Yeah,
just don't jump into any one. Look for something that is going to interest you, something that's going to keep you motivated. Just don't jump into the first one that's out there because as Frank said, it may not be something that keeps you motivated for a year, 5 years, 10 years. All right,
yeah.
let's
You
move
have to
on.
match with the league, and if you match with this one, great. I'm just saying I would not match with that
Yeah.
league.
Personally, myself, I think it's intriguing, but I think after a year or two, it would wear on me. I think, yeah. Let's go on to question number 2. So this viewer says, I'm in a keeper league where the trade offers always seem to be for my best player or farm prospects. How do you approach a manager who is always trying to get your best players? Good question.
Yes, when that's the Connor McDavid curse, because you have him, but then every time you try to trade, somebody's gonna come back and ask for Connor. So what you have to do is email. I like emailing and just say, look, this player is untouchable. If you want to make a deal, I have other players that are, but some of them just don't understand and just move on. Just there's the decline button and just move on from the managers. But others, you try to reason with them. I'm not going to trade Connor McDavid unless I get Shurstickin from the Rangers, grade A prospects, like a ton. It's like, say, no, move on. If you want to make a deal with me, look at these other players. Stop looking at that. Farm, it depends who. To me, no farm prospect should ever be untouchable. It's just if you're getting ridiculous offers for them, you always have that manager who's trying to win every aspect of the trade. Uh, again, decline and move on. But to me, Askarov is one of the premier goalie prospects on my farm. I would trade him. I've traded Tuukka Rask. I've traded so many. I traded away Ovechkin. I got him back. I've traded away McKinnon. I've traded away. I've traded for Malkin. I've traded him away. I don't have any untouchables. If there's a deal to be made, I make it. And so to me, it's like, but if you always have the same people who are bugging you, and when I recruited for my other leagues. Two of them had the Connor available. And I said, welcome to the curse, because every offer you're going to get is going to be for Connor McDavid. Everybody tries it, and it's like all your other players are invisible,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And typically they never offer anything close to the
No,
value. In one of our leagues, I got an offer recently that, what it was an easy decline because it wasn't even close.
yeah.
All right.
So,
Question number 3. My Dynasty League has 16 teams. Tough finding free agents. We have 50 moves allowed, 10 bench positions total. How should you structure bench positions? Yeah, good question. So you got 10 bench positions, 50 moves. How would you structure a bench around that? We don't know, how many positions of each, but let's just assume it's kind of the standard.
yeah. So you have, let's say it's centers, left wing, right wings, and defensemen and goalies. Um, so this is a deep league because we don't know how many total players, but if you have 10 bench spots, you're having over 20 players. So that's like over 300 players that are taken. So you need at least two of those benches to be for goalies, because if you get injuries, and how many injuries have we had to goalies so far this year? It's a ton. A lot of teams are down. Look at Toronto, top two down. Carolina, top goalie down. New Jersey, both of them down. So you can't get stuck with not meeting your minimum requirements. So if you have two starters, you need at least two goalie benches. Not starters, it can be backups. So that's out of the 10. Then you have 8 left. So again, because the free agent is thin, uh, an extra 2 Ds, at least one, maybe two, because there's not a lot of Ds that produce. My barriers half a point per game. Um, in 16 teams, if they have four, um, that is 64 Ds. You're going into the 30 points per year. So two bench Ds that produce half a point per game, that makes you have a competitive advantage. And then we're down to 6, and that would be two Cs, two left wings, two right wings, um, as an extra to to turn and try to get teams that don't always play on the heavy days, which is Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Uh, Maxime Comtois at Anaheim, they have a lot of Friday, Sunday games. So by doing that, you're getting extra games instead of benching said player on the Thursday, Saturday, because most
Okay.
teams play that on those days. And that you can do a Google to see. So sometimes having a
Mhm.
lesser player from a team that will play more during your week is better than to have a better player.
Yeah, good point. And same with position wise. If it's close between a center or a guy that can play, center left wing, you want the dual positions, right, Frank?
Yes, and triple positions, like flexibility is key with your bench. It helps. I don't have flexibility in my dynasty. We didn't go through it. I don't have a lot of dual position, and I get stuck sometimes having an empty left wing spot and an extra right wing that's on the bench. Uh, if I had the dual, I could have switched them to left wing. So yes, dual
Okay.
position becomes very valuable when you have a deep bench like this.
Okay. So there you go. 10 bench spots. You're looking at a couple goalies, couple defense, and then the remaining six for your forward position. Excellent. I'm learning a lot too here. Great questions. Next question, a little bit longer. I've played Dynasty for 8 years and made the playoffs once. I hear you. Can't seem to compete to reach them more, but always come close. I have Crosby, OV, Burns, and Stamkos. Is it time to cut bait with them for younger players and prospects? Currently in a playoff position now, but it's early. We have similar farm setup and 4 rounds of drafting. All right, so good. He's got some older stars. He's currently in a playoffs position. Should he cut bait?
We need to figure out why he's not making the playoffs. He must be weak either at G or at the rest, so he doesn't have the depth. Um, so if that's the case, this is where you do 2-for-1s, but you get the two and you give up the one. So you give up the better player like Crosby, who's top 20 year in, year out. He's not that so far, but let's say he's top 20. So when you give up a top 20, you get 2 top 50s. By doing that, your roster becomes more competitive. So if you do that with Crosby, you do that with Ovechkin. Burns is probably too late. He's 37. Stamkos is early 30s. So you're going to get probably 2 top 50s for Stamkos plus a grade A prospect. So Stamkos is still producing at a high level. Could keep him. But that's where the old adage, most fantasy writers, they say, whoever gets the best player wins the trade. I don't agree with that because um, you have situations where your team is not deep enough. So think of NHL. If you don't have a good third and fourth line, you're not winning the Stanley Cup. So if you're top heavy with these 4 players, but then you have Owen Tippett and Maxime Comtois, and the rest of your lineup, you have to wait for your farm to come up and replace those. And if it's G's, then you're in your position, Glenn, with your team. You're going to have to luck out on farm goalies that become number one starters. And then I would concentrate on trading Crosby for a goalie. Then you don't trade a top 20 for 2 top 50s. Goalies are very valuable. So top 100, like a surefire number one starter that's not on Chicago or Arizona, like a terrible team, is worth a Crosby if you don't have any. So we don't know all the answers. I'm just giving scenarios of why this person only made the playoff once, but there's something in the categories, and we went through analyzing the team stats with the pretenders, but the middle team, which was your team, Glenn, we went through where you were for each category. So this person needs to do that to see what stats are making him miss the playoffs, and then try to address it. So
Yeah.
I would say trade the first three, but Burns, you're not going to get anything for Burns because he's 37. But a person who's top two in the league, if he's smart, I would trade for Burns if I didn't already have him. If I
Yeah.
saw somebody was putting him for auction, I would tell him, shop him around, tell me your best offer, and I'll beat it. And I've done this so many times in the past. Whatever, don't accept anything. I'll beat it. But go see what you can get for it. So sometimes
Okay.
my competition will make me buy something for pennies on the dollar because they're offering pennies on the dollar, and I just beat it by a small margin. And for that team, it's better than to have Burns. In 3 years, Burns will be worthless, basically.
Okay. So there you go. I mean, if you're in a playoff spot and you feel like, you haven't been in the playoffs for a long time, or at least once in the last 8 years, it's your call ultimately. But as Frank said, this may be the good time to build up that depth so that you can be more competitive in years going forward.
So
And
if this
it,
person wants to do a follow-up email with more details, we can revisit it
yeah,
at a later
sure.
date. But we don't have enough information to give really
Right.
what he should
Right.
do. We
We
just
need to
went
know
with
the weakness. We need to know what's keeping you out of the playoffs. Is it injuries? Is it just, bad matchup luck? Is it goaltending? What is the reason why you've only made the playoffs once? And are these players you've had all 8 years, or are these players you've traded for thinking that you were going to? Yeah, we need a little bit more detail, but hopefully that helps. All right, question number 5. Dynasty League, 10 categories, 4 goalie, 20 teams. Ooh, only 5 bench positions. Oh, here's one for you, Frank. But 100 moves are allowed. 3 center, 2 left wing, 2 right wing, 6D, 2 goalie, 3 IR. Would you use more than one bench on a backup goalie? Only 5 bench positions. That
wow,
that talk about competitive. Woo. At least they allow
wow,
trades though.
wow. Okay, so here's the deal: 20 teams. That means there's 8 teams that don't have a second starter. All right, so some teams will only have one starter. If you only have one starter and a backup, and then another backup, you're probably going to need another backup because if your starter gets injured, you're screwed. If you have 2 starters, you can only use one bench spot as a backup goalie. So it all depends on where you stand because there's
Yeah.
32 NHL teams and there's 20 teams here. So you don't have 40 starters in the NHL. So it all
Yeah.
depends on where you're at because 40% of the stats are goalies. And if you look, there's 3, 5, 7, 13, 13 skaters plus 5 bench positions. So that's either skaters or goalies, but 13 skaters for 60%. So 2/15 for 40% of the
Yeah.
stats. So if you don't have a second starter, a surefire starter, you need one. If you have, and now the problem is the 1A, 1Bs, like you see in New Jersey, you don't have a clear cut starter. You have to make sure you meet your minimums. So I would say it all depends on what you have currently. If you have a Markstrom and a Demko, like I do, I would not spend more than one bench on a backup goalie. But if you don't, you would need to.
Okay. And I think, if you do have a Markstrom and Demko, try and get the handcuff for at least one of them. At least that's what I would probably do as my bench guy, because you're safe with those two, I would think, but you want that handcuff. And again, it's one of those
Yeah,
cases.
injuries can derail
Yeah.
a setup like this for
Yeah, it's
goalies.
one of those cases where we don't have enough detail because we don't know what this person has in terms of their goalies. But I like Frank's idea that evaluate your situation. If you have two starters, it's not as important. If you don't, then yeah, definitely you might want two backups.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, good. Thanks for the fantasy hockey talk. Well, you're welcome. I'm in a dynasty league where all trades are voted on by managers, majority rules. What do you think of this type of rule? I personally don't like it.
I 100% agree with you. It's complete BS. Um, there's no vetoes in the NHL. There's bad trades in the NHL. There's bad trades in Dynasty. Um, a lot of times you'll see people veto just out of spite because their biggest competition is getting the best of a deal. And I hate those types of leagues. So to me, it's change the rule or I would change leagues. This my dynasty that you're part of, Glenn. You don't know this, but that was created from another dynasty league where it wasn't even voted. It was the commissioner who would decide to approve or veto the trades, and he would always veto trades of his competition when they got the better of the trade. But he would always let his own trades when he got the advantage go through, and he would win every year, but he would manipulate the system. And you have commissioners like that their lives are so empty that winning a trophy gives them purpose in life. Um, it's unfortunate. So I left that league, created this dynasty league, and Wes came over. I brought a few managers over, and we redrafted and everything. And I said, we will do this the right way. Um, and that's why I have a co-commish. I never make my decisions alone. Um, and you cannot have ultimate power because some people I've seen commissions at the beginning of the playoffs drop players from other teams and add to his lineup to make sure he won the whole playoffs. He would just drop Ovechkin from a team and add him, like because you can do that as a commish, forcibly add. So he would get all the best players to start the playoffs, and he would win throughout.
Yeah. I think I agree. I do not like where either the league votes or the commissioner votes, especially in a dynasty league. I just think that human nature, the competitiveness always tends to kick in. Not always, but a lot of times it kicks in and it sways your judgment and you don't see the fairness of the trade. You see it from the perspective of your chances in the league. And I think
Yeah, and it's all
this,
opinion.
yeah,
My co-commish got a trade vetoed in his other dynasty, and the trade was Chandler Stevenson for Bobrovsky. He was giving up Stevenson and getting Bobrovsky, and the top, the second team in the league said this is unfair. Bobrovsky is way too valuable. And you look at Chandler; he's almost at a point per game, and Bobrovsky's Spencer Knight
yeah,
started the third game in a row. His stats are awful, but it's like, who are you to decide Bobrovsky's too valuable for Chandler Stevenson?
yeah.
So the coke it saved him because he kept the better player, but it's all opinion. Nobody knows what's going to happen, especially with goalies. They're so volatile.
Yep, exactly. And like you said, the NHL GMs make mistakes all the time, and that should be part of your
Cam Neely trade, Joe
yeah,
Thornton trade. There's
yeah,
so many examples.
yeah, exactly. All right, next question. I'm in a dynasty league where the same two managers are always trading every couple weeks and sometimes the same players back and forth. How do you prevent this? Or as a commish, would you step in?
Well, A, you have to figure out if they're the same person, uh, because that's just weird. I've had this happen in other leagues, but it wasn't a dynasty. And I just sent them a private email saying, what the hell are you guys doing? You know, like justify to me why you're doing this, or else I'm going to put a stop to it. You know, so because sometimes the same person and they look at how many games are coming up And so I don't know if it's always the better team that's getting the advantage. So I'm going to get a guy who's got 8 games. I'm going to trade a guy who's got 4 games in the next 2 weeks. And then, if 4 games becomes 8. So you have to look at the trends. Um, I wouldn't like it because, like, why trade the same player back and forth? If you don't like somebody, why do you like him 2 weeks later? So I've had this happen. I just sent them an email, wait for the answer. If it makes sense, okay, keep on going. But sometimes they would say, okay, sorry, we're not, we're gonna stop doing it. So
Okay, yeah, and there you go. Another case by case, and handle it privately, outside of the league forums. And
never post publicly when I send them a private email. I say, guys, this makes no sense to me. Please make it make sense to me.
yeah. And that's why when you join a dynasty league or you take over for a team, do some research on the league. Has it been going for many years? If you have a chance, maybe talk to some of the other managers, what's good about this league, and don't just jump in, because you may waste a whole year of your fantasy options by jumping in a league that's a lousy league. Right,
Yep,
Frank?
correct.
Okay. Next, first year dynasty league. Okay, so we got a first year league, no farm yet, as we will start next season with 10 prospects allowed with under 100 games played. We already know draft number, so we can keep an eye out on it and plan. I have the number 5 pick coming up, I guess, in a 14 team league. Who would you say are the top 5 guys I should consider that will be long-time studs in a league? Ooh, that's a tough one, because you'd have to take a look at games played. But kind of from what you know, Frank, these young players that have just come into the league in the last year or two, who are amongst the top 5? I guess that
Okay.
would be goalies as well.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go to my magical site. When I go to Dauber, uh, I'm gonna eliminate who I think is probably rostered, because you got to look at who would not be rostered. So hold on, but that's a great question. I think I know the answer, but I'm just checking to see if my answer is going to change with the rankings. So Dauber has a top 200 fantasy prospect forwards, and the list came out yesterday for the top 200 forwards. Cool. Okay, so if I look at the top 10 real quick, Rossi, Perfetti, Johnson, Beniers. Beniers is probably rostered. Kent Johnson, Grebs, Holtz, Byfield, Gwinter, and Mason McTavish, Safosky, Cooley, Berngren, Holiday, Coronado. Okay, so this person has the top 5 pick. Um, he is going to. I don't know how the draft is gonna fall between the 2023 draft versus these guys that are available now. But this draft that's coming up is going to be so deep. So Connor Bedard is probably going to be the first guy off the board. Fantilli is probably going to go also very, very high. Um, then you have Leo Carlson. Those 3 guys go beyond anybody that's currently available for the farm easily, and even Mishkov. But the problem with him is you have to wait 3 years because he's under contract for until 2026, and you don't know if he's going to come over. So he's a big gamble on that side. But that's 4 guys right there that if they survive to your number 5 picks, that I would pick.
Okay.
When you
What about a
have
what about a guy like Askarov? Would because likely he's not drafted in that league and
correct.
may be available. So would he be a top 5? Would you take him if he's still there at number 5?
Depends on the team need. If those 4 are gone, because one thing about the draft is there's a recency bias. Um, so people are going to look at the shiny new toy. So definitely, if the draft falls like I think it's going to fall, which is Connor Bedard #1, Fantilli #2, Mishkov #3, and Leo Carlson #4, then definitely look to goalies. So you have Askarov, who's #2 on this list. But there's also Wallstead from last year's draft, who's a grade A prospect. Uh, Kosa and Detroit. Why I'm mentioning them is they're going to have opportunity. Askarov less, but Wallstead, Kosa will have an opportunity to play in the NHL. And then you have all the defensemen. So Owen Power is probably rostered. But defensemen, I would not use my #5 picks. Um, you need generational talent. So it all depends on what goalies you currently have. If you go the Askarov, Wallstead, Kosa way, because even Askarov, he's 21 now. He's good 3-4 years away from being relevant, and Kosa and Wallstead are even longer, unless Minnesota Wallstead could potentially become a Ottinger and Carter Hart, play before he's his age 24, but we don't know. Yep.
All right, so let's get to the next. I got two more questions here that we want to cover. And when targeting players, short question, when targeting players, should you target starters or bench players? I guess you want to target both, but do you even target bench players, or are you always going for your starters?
Me, I don't have a choice. I can't. My starters are so strong uh, that, example, somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I have Timo Myers to trade to you, left, right wing. Are you interested?" I go, "I have nothing to give you. I have Tarasenko, Kachuk, like Zuccarello, who's a point per game, is on my bench. A point per game playing with Kaprizov. I only target bench players. I have no choice." So it all depends on where you are. If you're a contender, bench players, because you want that occasional game that they'll play, because they'll spend the Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays on the bench. It's when they have off day games. You want somebody that's more productive. If you're a middle guy and a pretender, you target your starters for sure, because you have room on your starters. I don't want to boast, but when you can when Zuccarello is your fourth best right wing, uh, who am I going to target as a starter? I have Tarasenko, Kachuk, and Kucherov. It's top
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
Like Kachuk and Kucherov are top 10 fantasy players. So it's like, who am I going to target? So it all
Yeah.
depends on what situation you're in. The previous question on trading Crosby for depth, that's still starters, because if you get two top 50 for a top 20, you're getting starters. So shore up your starters and then think about your bench, not the other way around.
And yeah, and if you're in a keeper league with a set amount of positions that you're keeping, you probably want to target guys that will continue to be a keeper. Am I correct there, Frank? Is like if you have three keeper centers and you've got two strong ones, but maybe a weak third one, maybe that's a priority to target in a keeper league.
It all depends. If you want to win, um, if you have redraft leagues with limited keepers, you have to balance the winning, so having a strong bench, versus, because your bench includes starters and, like, let's just say non-keepers, but you have to make sure you have your keepers set. They don't have to be the best, because sometimes you'll trade one for depth that will make you win. So it depends where you're at in the standings. But if you're down below in the standings, throw the kitchen sinks to get a better keeper at the end of the year,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. Because when you start over the next year, it's a redraft. but you're starting with a better player.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. And a fun one to end off with here, Frank. One viewer asked, "What was your favorite fantasy victory and why?" Now, the viewer didn't say gear this towards me or you. Well, we'll both go through it. Mine, of course, is my only championship in Real Deal. So that's easy for me. Making some bold moves, getting the goaltending, and then winning the league and coming second the year after. So that for me is the highlight of my dynasty experience. How about you, Frank? Because you have many to choose from.
I have too many.
Is there anything that stands out as, yeah, this was a tough year or tough competition? I really enjoyed beating this manager, or do they all just kind of mean the same to you?
I'm gonna say probably the inaugural season. I think I won it. Let me go look. That's the beauty of Yahoo. You can go back. So 2010. Did I win the first? I did win. Oh yeah, and I killed him. So I would say it was my first because this was our first year and starting up a new league. Like I said, I brought some managers over, and then I had to recruit new managers. And then I had a very specific draft strategy that I implemented, and winning and dominating the way I did. Um, it was pretty cool uh, because I was pretty new. I had played fantasy hockey for 4 years. I had never played a dynasty before, and when you start a dynasty, and we'll do videos next year before the season starts, people just go after the young players like dogs on a bone. And my strategy was, okay, let these guys fight over the kids. If they're available, I'll pick them. But I started right away taking older players, and I didn't finish first in the standings, as you can see. I had 410 points. The first place team had 415, and we're the top two teams, and I beat them 9-2. So I would say that because it really brought home my draft strategy that I was testing out for the first and only time, because this is my only dynasty league. So that was pretty cool.
All right, and there you have it. There is a wrap up to our 4 episode tutorial series. Again, we started into the season. Hopefully, we'll do one at the beginning, maybe in the summertime leading up to the next hockey season. But again, this is more so for you managers out there that are taking over halfway or at the beginning of a season for someone that has quit. So I want to thank Frank for coming in and kind of guiding us through the different possibilities that you might face and giving us his expertise. And of course, Frank and Eric and Ryan and I will be back very soon for an update on the current NHL season and some of the predictions that we made early on. So, Frank, any kind of last comments about fantasy hockey that you want to leave the audience off on?
Have fun. You know, that's the most important thing, especially when you're not in a cash lead. You only do this to have fun. So make sure you're in an environment where you have fun, and the rest will take care of itself. And I think we'll be back to do a podcast for the World Juniors, because that's always exciting to see what the prospects are doing, because now you're going to have a mix of the 2023s, which usually don't play, but they're so talented. I think a lot of them are going to make their country's respective junior teams.
All right. Thank you, Frank. We'll see you next episode. And again, don't forget to share, like, subscribe to the channel. Again, if you have any questions, email them to me or leave a comment. We can come back and readdress some questions at the beginning of our next tutorials next season, or during one of our average Albertan podcasts, we can do that too. So have a wonderful fantasy experience for the remainder of the year. And thanks again, Frank. We'll see you next episode.
See you later. Bye.